Is asking a federal court to allow its book ban to take effect. It bans certain books from schools. The courts have blocked it since December, but Capitol Bureau reporter Connor Hendricks looks at the arguments on both sides.
Tuesday's hearing centers on a case Iowa students and their families brought. They're arguing that Senate File 496 violates their First Amendment right to read and learn freely. Attorneys today argued if libraries are a form of government speech and whether or not that can be restricted. Eric Wesson with Attorney General Brenna Byrd's office says school libraries are required to support school curriculum, which the state sets. Wesson says librarians have to make sure the books they include in the library are aligned.
They must do so within the confines of the state law because the public schools are themselves representative of the state and the values that the state seeks to inculcate in children as part of its pedagogical goal of raising its future citizens.
Nathan Maxwell, an attorney representing the Iowa family, says the law is contradictory and that students have a right to diverse viewpoints in school. But the legal argument here focuses on what is government speech versus private speech.
To the extent that there's government speech involved in removing a book, that means there's also government speech in a book remaining. And so you reach the same problem that we identified in the district court, which is you end up with contrary and contradictory speech. And so the government cannot say two opposing things at the same time and it still be government speech.
The law bans these books at schools, not at bookstores or public libraries. Maxwell says courts have found that having books accessible at the local library or a bookstore is still a barrier. At the Iowa Capitol Bureau, I'm Connor Hendricks reporting.